Okay, so the first thing I wanted to look at this was the hip and knee flexion, and I did this by taking a snapshot of this particular angle so I could measure it. I think knee flexion was pretty similar in both. I wonder if someone would have more knee flexion or less if, let's say, their hamstrings were tight and it was a little more uncomfortable for them. I did notice that the hip flexion was slightly different. I think my classmate, his torso is a little more parallel to the ground, where Professor Ryan's a little more upright. And I think that Professor Ryan has a little bit more of a straighter back, which I think could be due to his neck being flatter and more neutral position, where my classmate has a little bit of neck extension. Professor Ryan used a cue to say to feel like there's a string being pulled from the crown of your head. I think that's a great cue. Also telling him, my classmate, to look straight down at the ground instead of looking a little bit further ahead of him. I think this movement is great for an everyday task, such as picking something up off the floor. I know older adults have a harder time doing that, or leaning over to get something at a lower cabinet. I also think sports specific, this is very similar to an RDL, so that could be helpful. Something else that I noticed about this video is when it continues playing, I noticed that Scott and Professor Ryan's come up from this position a little bit differently. Scott comes up, and I feel like at times he leads a little more with his head or with his chest, where I feel like Professor Ryan has better at everything coming up at the same time. So I wonder how that can affect the movement. I'd probably cue Scott to try and keep his neck neutral and his back flat as he comes up into this position, to try and have more everything come up at the same, and you don't have such an arch in that lower back. But those are the things that I found interesting about this. Again, I think it would be great for just picking something up off the floor, is going over this movement, and seeing it in slow motion helps see the differences.